Saving the world, that's something that, from a design perspective, we tend to think that that's something we can do. It's rather an arrogant way of thinking about the role of design, but I think when design is something that you're really fascinated by and believe in, you tend to believe these sorts of things. I began my design career when I graduated, working with a group of my colleagues, and we started a design and media company. And we did this because here at RMIT, our professors said that design was an intellectual activity. It was an area where you could provoke, you could challenge, and you had the opportunity to really try and change the world. So for us, we felt that design was something that was intellectual and something that we could really communicate with others and make a big difference. Now, in the 1980s, when we started, design was about form. So the 20th century was very much around the role that form played. And that meant radical form was the nest, was the embodiment of radical ideas. And this was the case throughout the 20th century, so whether or not it was Deshti or Dada at the beginning and deconstructivism at the end, the same ideas applied. And so we were busy designing the most radical forms that we could think of, which we believed would allow us to communicate radical ideas. This changed in the 90s. Professor Chris Ryan at the Centre for Design at RMIT organised the first Domus Winter School. And the Domus Academy, like quite a large section of the Italian design community, came with a very different message. They said there is one role for design, and that is how to transition from a wasteful economy to a society, an economy, production system that is all about reducing our carbon footprint. And so suddenly you had a very different idea about what design was about, no longer about form. And this image, which was from a project we were involved in, it's all about systems. So what happens is, rather than, say, designing object by object, or in architecture designing a single building, you are designing some kind of system. The Domus professors said, single design of an object or a building is pointless. You have to basically be involved in designing new systems. A completely different way of thinking about the world of design. Totally different scale. So whether or not you're designing objects from an industrial design perspective or designing single buildings, it's not going to cut it. Now, the different disciplines have different ways of thinking about design, how you approach design. And the discipline that I'd come from, architecture, has a different attitude towards the way in which you put design together. Martin Pawley, the English architecture critic and author, has described architects as licensed specifiers. And he said, what we do as architects is we go to other people's design catalogues and we select elements and we put them together to design our buildings. It's very different in industrial design. In industrial design, you are really constructing things from which maybe other people can work with those tools, those elements, to create new outcomes. But in architecture, we're really working with other people's catalogues. And having listened to the Domus professors, the question was, well, is that the best we can do? Really, we are hamstrung by the tools that other people give us. And so we've got this big kind of Domus Academy model of, let's really think about how design can be used to transform the way we operate in terms of the way we live, our production systems of production and economy. We're going to need new tools. So surely we should be thinking about creating new tools in a way that starts to make architecture look more like industrial design. So I became very involved in a project to develop up new systems for architecture. I had started my master's degree at RMIT, and confronted by an opportunity to think of a project, it was, well, obviously, start thinking of a system. So working with a collaborator, Anthony Kitchener, we started to imagine a whole new tool set for an architectural system that was focused on how to create a sophisticated lifestyle, but with massive reduction in carbon footprint, use of energy, ways of conserving water, etc. And so this became our focus. Now, in a project like this, we broadly were creating a kind of paper architecture. So this was something speculative. So this was just a set of ideas that they were being exhibited as part of a master's degree program, but really they didn't have any real impact on the world. Now, in 1994, we were approached by the head curator at Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney, Michael Bogle. And he said, look, I hear you guys are thinking about a future architecture, how to reconceive and think of architecture in a much more sustainable way. I have an exhibition, it's called Domestic Revolution, and we are looking at the history and the future of cooking and the kitchen in Australia. Would you like to participate? If so, it's not the house we're interested in, it's the kitchen. And so he put this question to us, well, what would the kitchen of the future look like? And we thought, well, that's a really interesting question. In designing this sort of first stage of the project, and this project I'll go through has 3 stages really, and the first one is trying to think about a whole architectural system in response to the Domus Academy. But now we had a single thing that we had to look at, which was, what would the kitchen look like coming out of this bigger project? So working with David Polton, who's a maker and architect, we assembled a team of people to start to build a full-scale model of what this kitchen might look like. And what we did was use the work that I'd done with Anthony about the architectural system and bring those down to how would they inform and affect the kitchen. And we produced this, which was a full-scale mock-up of the kitchen of the future. And it had a whole lot of the services that we had thought about connected into it, but of course none of them worked. In industrial design prototyping, this is called a roller. And a roller, you see them with concept cars. It looks like the real thing, it looks like it can work, but in fact it's a big maquette, it's beautifully painted, but it's non-functioning. So our big challenge with this was, now we had one element of our house project, the kitchen, which we're exhibiting at full scale so that it looks like it's the real thing. And now we had to convince people that the kitchen in its own right was a really good idea. And what Chris Ryan had said to us from the Centre of Design was, sustainability and sustainable innovation don't sell ideas. What sells ideas is a better experience. So what we needed to do was to create a story about the kitchen. So we've got this full-scale model and we've got all this technology, but what we really need to do is create a story. So we created a scenario, the story of the instant kitchen, and it goes like this. 600,000 years ago, human beings started to gather together in large numbers to socialize, to celebrate, and for things like rituals. And they would be eating, and there would be, food was a very important part of the process. Now, what they would do, of course, is they would find the best location for a campsite, and that would be where they wanted to be, where they needed to be. What that meant was, of course, was that you could only cook to a degree to which a campsite would allow you to cook. I'll just... Now, the solution to that is only 10,000 years old. And that solution is create a static kitchen, create something that is a resource, a lot more technology, so you can transform the food more and create cuisines. And that gives you a lot more sophistication, but it's isolating. So what happens is that suddenly the people involved in preparing the food are no longer part of the bigger social enterprise. So our thinking was, what about if we made a campsite that was so high technology that everything you needed for a high-end kitchen was jammed into this device, this kitchen, and you could roll it to wherever you needed it. And somehow you could very quickly plug it in and unplug it. And in our minds, this would bring together the two advantages of the static kitchen, but also the original mobile kitchen. And then we said, think about how we're living today. Today we're living in much more compact spaces. We're living in these very dense, complicated environments in cities. Kitchens, as they currently are, take up quite a lot of room, and they require a lot of servicing. They require a lot of waste often in their construction, and people want to change their kitchens quite often. In fact, in renovations, it's the most common element to change. So if we could create a compact kitchen that performed like a high-end Italian kitchen or a German kitchen, but you could just roll in and out, it would mean more spaces could be used, they'd be more flexible, we don't have to do any renovation or demolition in order to make these spaces available, and it extends the lives of the buildings that we're using. So our argument then becomes, this is going to give you a much more sustainable way of creating a higher value way to cook. So here was our kitchen maquette, and there was a lot of interest in it. We exhibited it in Melbourne and Sydney repeatedly. We also made a bathroom. So going back to our idea of the bigger architectural project, stage 1, and we're now in stage 2, which is the building this maquette of the kitchen. And we found that this was an idea people were really interested in. So it was on television, it was widely published. But the big problem with it is, of course, none of this is functioning. These are speculations. And while there was a great deal of interest in it, it wasn't seen as a realistic alternative to what was available. And this led us to the next phase of the project, which was, it's clear to us that what we need to do is make something that actually works. Now, we had built full-scale examples of the bathroom. We've entered lots of competitions. We thought, well, maybe one way to do this is we will start including elements of our design, our architectural proposition, into all our commercial architecture. So cinema complexes, banks, various things of the future. And so we use these as opportunities to test ideas about our design. But the reality is the core components of our design, which have to do with changing systems in order to make them more flexible, more sustainable, we couldn't include, partly because, in fact, they're going to need changes to the building regulations for them to be able to be built or made available. But we continued to develop up our project and find new ways to explore it. What was happening was we were starting to realise that maybe what we needed to do was find a way of getting our design into more conventional settings. So rather than trying to propose an entire architectural solution, what about if we designed elements that could be slotted into the way that existing formats, existing architectural scenarios are presented? And this brings me to the next part of the project, part 3. We thought, okay, let's try and see if we can make all the bits work. And this is a very, very different way of working. Gone are the publications, gone are the photographs. It becomes a very messy backroom exercise. And you would know this from your own work and study. This stuff becomes really important because this is how we're going to learn. We started to think, you know, if we begin to just try and prototype up small parts of it, what we learn, we can use in a fragment by fragment model to begin to build up a better picture of the whole thing. And we thought, look, let's give ourselves the goal of trying to understand what the systems might be in an architectural way that impinge on the kitchen and create a template for what this kitchen might be. And the kitchen is not like an IKEA kitchen in the sense that this architecture is really about a different kind of performance. So this is a box that comes with induction cooktop and downforce extraction systems and water heater, all sorts of reconfigurable work surfaces, etc. So it really is everything you need with the exception of a fridge inside a box. So we're trying to create the highest level of performance that we can, but in a very, very compact and very rational way. And we worked for 2 years on creating a digital twin and experimenting with the various elements that we thought would be necessary to make this kitchen work. And we got a workshop in New Gisborne, and with our team, we decided halfway through this process in 2015, why don't we look at building an entire kitchen, bringing all these together and self-funding the construction of a working prototype? Because at this stage, our feeling was, it was clear that no matter how much we took our idea as a speculative notion to the rest of the world, that they might express some interest, but it's not going to really change anything. So we have to build a fully operating prototype. Now this, in industrial design, prototyping parlance, is called a technology demonstrator. So what we've been doing is going through the different kinds of prototyping scenarios. And you can see it down the bottom here. And this is the first meal. This is part of the crew who built it. And we've turned a garage into a kitchen where we can make risotto. And in this kitchen, all you need is 10 amp power and water to get yourself a fully operating kitchen that includes these dishwashers and the induction cooktop and all of the amenity that you need. Now, we thought at this point, fantastic. We have now got ourselves the next step, this next really critical stage, fully operating prototype. Now people are going to stand up and listen to us and say, this is incredible. You've really started to think about how we can reimagine architecture and reimagine kitchens in terms of how they might be used, and start thinking about how this could change the way people use their houses. But the next lesson is, while building something is 10 times harder than it is to draw it, design it, that's nothing by comparison to trying to sell something. So we really did enter a new phase, which was taking the kitchen to the best urban culinary cultures that we could find to say, hey, we've got this new product. So I took the kitchen to Hong Kong, Milan, and Tokyo, and said, look, this is the future. Thinking that, of course, in environments where you've got very dense urban infrastructure, you've got the very fluid communities, and you've got a lot of interest in food, this is perfect. But it turns out that's not really quite how the world works. So I found that in Tokyo, the manufacturers who are central to the development of new products. In Japanese culture, you need very specific entrees to be able to meet people. And they might take years to put together. And we had extraordinary entrees, but not extraordinary enough. So we weren't able to meet anybody. In Hong Kong, we discovered there are two kinds of kitchens. They're both quite compact in a way. One, people will spend $50 on their kitchen and they'll get a two-top gas burner. The second are people who want very glamorous trophy kitchens, and the trophy kitchens need trophy Italian appliances, and nothing else will do. Interestingly, those kitchens will never get used, so they're not actually about function. And then there was Milan, and in Milan we discovered that really, unless you were prepared to go and spend a lot of time with the Italians, they weren't really interested in ideas that had come from somewhere else. Because from their perspective, their incredibly refined Italian design sensibility, it's not a language that Australians understand. And we didn't see it as an option to relocate to Milan to try and continue the process. We developed a lot of collateral about how this saves space, reduces the need for renovation, constant upgrades. So we put a lot of work into trying to create collateral to communicate to people about why this was a really good idea. So we did our diagrams. We made them look as appealing and as convincing as possible. And we spoke to some extraordinarily important people. But what we discovered was that the role that we thought design could play, it didn't really appear to be the case. And I think at that moment we started to think, in a way, what is the role of the designer when it comes to provoking innovation? Should it be the designers? Maybe it should be that designers aren't the people that come up with the completely new paradigms. Maybe it's better that designers respond to paradigms developed by others. And I guess that wasn't that wasn't something that we'd been thinking about. We thought, well, if you've got the opportunity to develop ideas and to prototype them and test them, this should be a strong platform for really trying to convince people to change. So our solution to this was, we have to be more specific about a client. We have to go and find a specific group of people for whom we can design this thing. And so, looking at our research, we thought, well, we know that in Australia, the hospitality industry, particularly the winemaking industry, the wineries, they're always looking for pop-up kitchens. They're combining often their wine with restaurant offers. So maybe this is a perfect example. So we started to think about how to streamline our design very particularly for this client group. And while I guess we were to some degree questioning the wisdom of our decision to plunge into this, what would happen is I'd keep reading documentation. So we're talking now some decades after we began this process, but the commentary that was coming up that you'll find out, in magazine culture and on blogs, the emerging commentary about the future of the home and how we will live. And what I read about is the responsive home, the fuzzy home, the flexible home, the fluid home, the ambiguous home, the shared, hybridized home, the user-centered home, the co-designed home, the plug-in home, and it's all about opportunistic spatial design and the need for design the occupants to do more in one small space. And what's interesting is that particular rhetoric is generally not backed up by work, by functioning work. It's generally backed up by more speculative design. So we thought, surely this direction that we've been going in and exploring actually has some serious legs. And this brings me to, I guess, the the final lessons of the project. This has been an iterative design project, and every step of the journey, we learn things we didn't know before. So we would call this a kind of, it's a provocation, it's a mix of empirical, speculative, prototype-based design research. Now, in David Graeber and David Wengrow's book, The Dawn of Everything, they talk about the idea that human culture is basically experimentation. There's no single narrative, there's no kind of pathway along which it's supposed to go. Extraordinary range of cultural experimentation gives us an incredible set of templates about what we could do as the next generation in terms of thinking about our future. And in that respect, we could say that experimentation of any kind is valuable because it ends up being part of this bigger range of template options. So maybe we could say that speculative and provocational design has a role to play in this bigger experimental model. And the second thing is learning through doing. While at this stage we haven't convinced a large number of people that this is precisely what they need in their kitchen right now, the process of making, as Lambros Melathouris and Colin Renfrew have identified, making is a way of understanding and also conceptualizing. And they argue that making is like a form of extended cognition, that we develop conceptual ideas through making, that the material challenges in making are what allow us to reconceptualize. And so there's another value in this kind of project, which is the potential for conceptual learning. So that's another takeaway from the project. And I guess, finally, as we now work on our second prototype and we take the lessons that we've learned thus far and combine them into this second one, we feel still that the key questions that faced us at the very beginning of the project, how do we as a design community participate in a bigger conversation around addressing things like climate change and really transforming the footprint that we have, while at the same time maintaining as good an experience, if not a better experience. The role that designers can play in that conversation is by introducing elements that people can reflect on and allow people to maybe think differently. And certainly for us, this project has great value in the sense that it allows us to initiate conversations around, well, how do we work with our lifestyle so that we can begin to really think about reducing our impact on this planet? And that's a conversation that we want to be part of in contributing to, but we want everyone to participate in. Thank you.